Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. With me this morning are my collaborators and colleagues, political activist and strategist Seth Sturm, formerly the co-chair of the West Virginia Democratic Party Indigenous Caucus, and editor of Left Voice and New Jersey independent journalist Sam Carliner. And we are going to be talking about former New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez and how he ties into what Donald Trump famously referred to as the swamp. Sam, you are from New Jersey. I know that you said you hadn't really followed this as closely. I just want to ask you as a good start, before I get off on anything, what do you know and not know about Menendez? Let's start there.
I know that he looks like a Keebler elf.
Yes.
I know this was not his first corruption investigation.
No, he previously, this was actually a retrial from a hung jury.
I know and I know we'll be talking about this, that his career is based on sanctioning and waging economic warfare on many a country, particularly in Latin America. I think my Wi-Fi is bad. Are you guys picking up me fine?
You're coming through good. Okay,
great. You guys are not on my end, but as long as everyone can hear me, hopefully that's not an issue. Yeah, I know that much, and I know that the investigation very much revolved around him taking gold bars, which he said he hoarded because of his trauma from communist Cuba.
Which, is kind of ironic, really. Let me make sure I'm looking at Menendez correctly. But I'm glad you mentioned the communist Cuba trauma, because his connection to, expat networks in Latin America was fundamental to his foreign policy role in the Senate. He was the Senate's liaison to the CIA on things like coups in Venezuela. He and Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, who all come from the same general expat community, are the guys who liaise with the CIA on this stuff.
And correct me if I'm wrong, this may need to be fact-checked, but I'm pretty sure his parents actually left Cuba before the revolution. One of those.
Menendez was born in New York in 1954. His parents had left Cuba in 1953. Now, for historical context to what Menendez is claiming, 1952 is when Batista took power. So people who left Cuba in 1953 were not fleeing Castro. They were fleeing pro-U.S. dictator Fulgencio Batista. So think about that for a moment. When he talks about trauma in communist Cuba, he's talking from the point of view of a New Yorker, born in New York, raised in New Jersey, lived in Union City most of his life when not working in politics in D.C., and he's saying, I hoard gold bars because of the trauma of a country I've never been to. I was born in the U.S. after my parents fled the dictator before Castro, just 1 year after he took power. Now, it's worth noting that in 1952, Batista was still claiming to be a socialist. And there were some people who did flee the country because in the first couple of years, Batista did do some things that helped the urban working and middle classes. But the problem is Batista ultimately helped the urban working and middle classes by bringing in Western capital and by maintaining the system of economic de facto slavery that was used to make lots of money selling sugar to the U.S. Remember, C&H sugar stands for Cuba and Hawaii.
I actually didn't even know that part. Useful info.
The history of the sugar and banana industries in Latin America is really interesting. So what happened is Castro finally nationalized the sugar industry with the intention of making things better for workers in the sugar industry. In response, Eisenhower declared an oil embargo. And in response to the oil embargo, Cuba nationalized its refineries. It only had a couple, but they were owned by U.S. companies, and Cuba nationalized them in response to the oil embargo. At which point Eisenhower laid down the embargo that we all know and love today. But this all happened in 1959. There was no Cuban trauma about communism in 1953 when Bob Menendez's parents came to the U.S., or in 1954 when Bob Menendez was born in New York. And to the best of my knowledge, while Democrats have run Union City, New Jersey for a very long time, it has never been communist.
Although I do dream of the day where New Jersey is a hub of socialist activity. We're far from that, but
that would be great.
I believe it's possible.
You need a program. You need to start with it probably needs to start at a local level and move up. But what you need is a boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement in state politics against companies that do business with the U.S. military-industrial complex.
And also, I'm sure we'll get into this, but I have my whole theory, which I think, probably is true, that like the NJ Democrats are just really going fully in on trying to make the state a hub of military Keynesianism.
Hey, I mean,
it's going to be our governor race.
The Hudson County Democratic Party, well, not the Hudson County Democratic Party, the Hudson County Commission were the people who took the case to court to overturn New Jersey's ban on ICE jails in New Jersey, because Hudson County, New Jersey is making so much money leasing facilities to private ICE jails.
And mind you, Biden put his thumb on the scale that very publicly stated, that he supports the private prison company that sued our state for passing an ICE detention ban.
Fun fact, since you mentioned it, there was a big meeting in 2009, 2010 between border security people, immigration activists, activists for Dreamers, private think tank / influence shops, where ultimately a group called the Emerson Collective, which is a venture philanthropy corporation, private corporation, owned by managing partners Laurene Powell Jobs, who put up most of the money, former Obama Education Secretary Arnie Duncan, and former U.S. money manager for the Saudi royal family's sovereign wealth fund, Michael Klein. The Emerson Collective put together a program for quote-unquote legal immigration reform, combined with amped up border enforcement, combined with a expanded facility of ICE jails, longer holding times, and fewer people ultimately being given admission if they entered quote-unquote illegally. So all of that said, ultimately, the point was the Emerson Collective said, and this needs to be public because these ICE jails need to essentially be a federal jobs program, like trying to make this whole system of enforcement progressive somehow. And and Joe Biden is the guy in the meeting who says, but what about our friends in the private prison industry? Seth, you've been quiet for a bit. What do you know about Bob Menendez?
I know very little actually about him beyond what's happened in this trial. But what's striking to me, what you're talking about, what I'm seeing a pattern of, you've got Bob Menendez lying about the trauma caused by communism. You've got the Democrats you're talking about there and the way that they co-op. It's just the way that everybody co-ops these things. Biden, I've lost my train of thought with what you were saying in regards to Biden there, but
Biden was the guy in the meeting about
the private
border
framing the private
and
prisons.
Enforcement. He said, "What about our friends in the private prison industry?"
Right, framing the private prison industry as something progressive. It's this thing where they take and co-opt all of these big rhetorical ideas that mean something to the people that are the rank and file Democrats, and they twist them and manipulate them to politicize. They politicized identity, causes, everything, to where if you take any opposition to their framing of the issues that, you know, they've twisted from the core intent, you're labeled as some sort of problem, right? So it's just what I'm seeing is the same thing that I've experienced in my work with the Democrats, is the way that you have good, honest people. Honestly, I know this is controversial sometimes, but good, honest people at the bottom trying to do good work. They think they're doing good work, but the structure within that they're working within limits their ability to actually do that. And so the larger leadership frames these issues as progressive, takes, you know, the student, let's say student loan debt, they do something fractional for a very small percentage of the people, and then claim these big reforms that everybody should tout as these gigantic wins. It's the lack of authenticity, the lack of bold leadership that everybody's actually looking for, and that's where that disconnect comes from. And they've mastered weaponizing those rhetorical twisting them, I should say, spinning what people want and what we're saying and what they espouse versus the actual acts that they're taking and what they actually do. I mean, look at Bob Menendez. He's taking gold bars, and was it something about halal meat and some regular? I mean, it was just crazy. And like, what are we even doing here? That this is how they operate. And here's one guy. He's found because they investigated him. What if we investigated everybody for that same level of corruption? What would we find? I just find it really hard to believe he's a one-off when we have so much evidence of this type of corruption. And it's very interesting to me. So what do I know about Bob Menendez himself? Not a lot, but I'm seeing the same thing that he does is a lot of what other Democrats do, and what the Democrats as a whole allow these lies to be cover for their inaction, for their leanings towards protecting capital and wealthy interests. That's what they're hiding. So I don't know. I'm seeing the theatrics of it all versus the rest.
Well, if I can interject on that, because if that's all right, I think you know, one thing that I've been struggling with, I have no faith in the Democrats. I have no faith that they're at a party worth trying to reform. I know that that's going to be a debate within the left, and I think there are genuinely left people who they might not say it, but this is essentially their strategy. Anyways, sorry, I'm going on a tangent. The point is, in New Jersey, I think in particular, one of the issues that the Democrats actually use to maintain some amount of legitimacy in the eyes of genuinely left people is immigration. They're weirdly, even like the ghouls, like the worst of the worst, like Bob Menendez. Well, the worst of the worst is Josh Gottheimer, and he's going fully into just attacking immigrants. But Bob Menendez, Cory Booker were both fairly to the left of the party on immigration. Now, the bar is incredibly low. The Democrats don't give a fuck about immigrants. Are we allowed to curse on this stream?
Yes, you're allowed to curse on this stream.
Okay, great. I never know.
You're invited to curse on this stream.
Well, there we go. I'm from New Jersey, so we'll have to do that more. No, and I don't believe this is out of the goodness of their heart. I believe it's one because they genuinely understand the value of immigrant labor in a exploitative way for the state. I also think that immigrant rights organizing has been very powerful here. They had to be left on it. But all of this is to say, I genuinely think NJ Democrats represent the left wing of an increasingly rightward shifting party on the question of immigration. Now, at the end of the day, what does that do when the party and the president and the administration that they're campaigning for and telling everyone to support says, hey, you can't pass this ban. We need to support the private prison company. I'm going to overrule it. And there's been a big push also in our state for recent legislation, the Immigrant Trust Act, which would protect immigrants. And I'm not going to say, no, don't fight for reforms. Obviously, I think that any reform that could provide some protection is worth it. But at the end of the day, that reform will not come from these Democrats because their party doesn't support it. I'm going on a tangent, but it is I feel like it. On your point about them giving fluff, they do that with immigration big time in New Jersey.
If I can interject for a moment, I will say that the idea that we should not ever even bother to work for reforms is something Karl Marx himself rejected, and something that even Vladimir Lenin said, even though ultimately we should vote no on everything our government tries to pass unless it actually concedes to all our demands, we should absolutely advocate for the most aggressive reforms possible in the debates. And this is something that a lot of people who claim to be Leninists forget these days.
I mean,
go ahead.
You go. No, you go.
Well, I'm not somebody who ascribes myself to any theory. I really don't. I think that we have a lot to learn from these people, a lot to learn from how things have actually been enacted versus the ideology. I think that we need we need a new modern approach to governance, especially just focusing on the US here. So what I've been really thinking about lately is the need for, and perhaps this is the time with everybody seeing in your face Trump fascism on full display, and Democrats' lack of leadership in this moment. Where are they, by the way? So at this time, is it feasible to start a national movement for reconstitution, foundational reforms to fix, look, this country was founded on a flawed ideology, right? We have long had problems. We fought for every little reform that we've gotten and gained, every freedom, every right. It's still not enough. And now we're seeing modern technology and the end result of this long process, right? So when people are seeing these systems fail, and we've got both parties beholden to donors rather than people, I'm not arguing both parties are the same here, but there is that in common, right? So when people feel helpless, we're at a point where things are going to either go one way or another. And we either organize outside of this party system, outside of the electoral, outside of the system entirely, and force it. You have to force these people to make concessions and do the change. We've got to work outside of traditional boundaries, though. And I think that we're at a moment where perhaps people are open to hearing this, even, regular people who aren't that involved in leftist politics. And if framed correctly, I think there's a massive opportunity here to avoid the worst and promote something that could radically change the way we do things, because people are aware of what's happening and they do see, hey, the system's not working. And if we go back to the status quo pre-Trump, we're just kicking the can down the road. And I think people are starting to recognize that. Hopefully, I might be being too optimistic, but to me, what we're talking about here, all of these issues are stemming from that same source, which is a foundation that is crumbling, cracking under modern pressures.
No, we're definitely seeing a lot of the pressures of the way the modern world is changing and the way that affects capital and the way that affects this every millionaire should be a billionaire attitude about the US economy that appears to drive both parties. I mean, I think it's totally capitalism's failure to adapt to the modern world has always been a big part of the problem. Capitalism is able to implement technology, but it is not able to adapt to modern social conditions.
Well, it's fundamentally a system premised on the idea that you can grow and grow and grow indefinitely, which is just not possible on a planet with finite space for that.
Well, there's this whole, and that's really ultimately the whole, and it's something that a lot of Marxists forget. This is why I tend to be holistic and synthetic about theory rather than just trying to say I'm a Marxist or I'm an anarchist or anything like that. But ultimately, you've got a system where people say things like this: capitalism helps everyone who is willing to do the work. But in actual fact, capitalism helps the people who put up the money, the capital. That's why they call it capitalism. The capitalist is making an investment and expects to make a profit, and the whole system is dependent on a profit for the capitalist. All the people who are willing to do the work in the hopes of benefiting from capitalism are making money for the capitalist, and they are only going to benefit from capitalism if the capitalist pays them with a significant portion of the value that they create for him, which the capitalist doesn't do because that is directly in violation of his own interests for maximizing profits. Now, here's the question. Why would you work to benefit other people? Does anyone have the answer to this? It's obvious to me.
Sorry, this may be a goofy question. Is this person live, or did you pull this from somewhere else?
This is the live chat. This is the troll in our live chat right now. Oh, this is
fun. Okay, this is okay. All right. Yes, why would you work to benefit other people? I mean, my immediate thing is that we actually, despite, what this or that capitalist will say, benefit from exchanging in a shared, I'm blanking on the words. Yeah, like it actually is to your benefit to engage in your community, your species, quite frankly. Like the idea that any collaboration with other people isn't in your own benefit is just, I think, 100% wrong. And of course, ingrained in the logic of capitalism, but that's my initial take. How much more could your wage be if the capitalist handed more out to you.
Yeah, this is ultimately the question. You work because you have to work for the capitalist to hand you out wages. That's nice and simple, but you're not getting the benefit of your work. The capitalist is getting the benefit of your work, and all you're getting is the wages. So see, you're the capitalist in this equation. You're the one exploiting others. You're the one dependent on others being willing to work for themselves. And when you work for others, you're benefiting yourself. You only make money if other people have money to buy your stuff. For other people to buy your stuff, they have to make money.
Your businesses also would not function if you didn't have people working at them.
Exactly.
So you're not working.
And if you're working for yourself and don't employ anybody else in your business and you're paying money back to the bank, do you really own your own business, or are you the bank's employee?
I will say I do love that it's not I do like that it's a car photography account. I don't know. I just find that a fun little sidetrack that we're usually they just have the typical capitalist nonsense in their bio. I like that they've got other interests.
I think that's actually something that's a common tactic with these right-wing propagandists, right? They find a niche community, start an account regarding that, right?
Yeah.
We had Connor Exum, who's been on the show several times. He exposed a snowplow forum that was harboring far right.
It's really a Nazi forum. It claims to
be crazy how
it claims to be a snowplow forum, but it's really a Nazi forum. It's the funniest thing.
See, my thing is I live around all the liberals in their worst form. So it's still a novelty when I come across right-wingers. I'm sure that if you're interacting with them much more than I do, you get tired of it. I'm like, oh, this is new. I haven't encountered
it's really
hard.
I
find it interesting to actually talk to people. That he sells tools. So
who makes the tools?
Exactly. Who makes the tools? Why do the people who make the tools work to make the tools?
Why are they not making as much money as you?
Why are the people
more than you, quite frankly?
Exactly. They're that whole system. The people making the tools are doing all the work. Now,
I didn't even know there was a chat. I'm going to go back to not looking at the chat here, guys.
No, and that's fair. It's now we're getting people talking to each other about tooling in the chat and ignoring see. I buy the tool.
Isn't it great to exchange with other people
and
about
buying the tool,
joint human project instead of doing your stupid little looking out for yourself at all times?
By buying the tools,
shared experience.
But also by buying the tools, you help the capitalist profit at the expense of the workers. And while you can say, yes, I help pay the worker's salary, you're also helping to motivate the capitalist exploitation of the workers by paying for the tools.
Now,
someone's feeling self-conscious. We haven't even used this word yet today. And I usually use this word a lot on the show, but I haven't used this word once yet today. And I think we can go ahead and end this now.
Well, I was going to say, speaking of tools, Bob Menendez, if we want to track back to that, I just thought that would be a fun transition. But yeah, I don't know where we want to go, where you guys want to go. I'll just take the conversation back to New Jersey because I do have thoughts.
That's perfect. Right. No, I like these general digressions when somebody asks questions that can actually be useful for educational answers. Mm-hmm. But when people aren't willing to engage with those answers seriously, you lose interest after a while.
Yeah. No, I do want to talk about that because we were talking about corruption and how corruption is everywhere. And one thing I will say is, as an observer of the shockwaves, right, the Menendez trial, sent throughout New Jersey. And I will say his replacement, Andy Kim, the discussion for a year among people who still have faith in the Democratic Party in the state is that this was going to change NJ politics. Like, it's a brand new day. It's a more democratic state now. Now, I will say, I do think it was genuinely fascinating to watch this political machine. And there's other political machines that are getting challenged. Norcross in the south of the state. Shake up what that means, for this political dynasty to fall. But in terms of the idea that this was going to be a brand new day, more democratic, well, I think
I've got a question here.
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt, but what you're saying is just, I hate that I get sucked back into talking about my experience with the Democrats.
No, it's helpful to know.
But this is so interesting. You're using the phrase "a new day" a lot. And in West Virginia, we had the Joe Manchin machine absolutely destroyed by Harold Ickes, the garbage man, through Selena Vickers, this lady who's just very involved in all these procedural nonsense things within the party.
Interestingly, from her personal history, was very, very active in supporting Bernie Sanders in 2016 and was one of the first people to sell out to Hillary Clinton after the primaries.
But this is also a pattern in other states where these long-standing political machines are being targeted by the DNC. They're doing these regime changes in a lot of states. It's happened in Alabama. They're involved in all of these little states, and a new day is a phrase that keeps coming up. The silencing of rank and file Democrats in these states, minorities especially, is a pattern that I've been documenting and that nobody seems to care about. But you see it here. So I've been wondering why Bob Menendez is now removed, and you've got the what's the word I'm looking for? The facade of a new day, when really they're
let's talk about
more power. They're monopolizing power across all of the states where you had these strong people that weren't necessarily always in line. The Democrats had to do a lot to keep Joe Manchin happy. They spent a lot of money here in West Virginia, like in 2018, advertising Joe Manchin and running a pro-Trump messaging campaign for Joe Manchin, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now they've eliminated a lot of those type of people, and they've got this new network of sycophants willing to do whatever so that they now have a position within the party, so that they now have some sort of influence locally. And it's just, this pattern keeps appearing across Democratic parties in all of these different states where there were these strong political machines. And I just can't help but notice that this seems to be a larger strategy from the Democrats, like I said. And people have got to start realizing that we've got to, I don't know. When you started saying a new day and you're listing all of these things that aren't new,
it ties in. It ties in really well. This is one of the reasons I wanted you on this show, because it ties into your experiences in West Virginia. You look at who Andy Kim is. Andy Kim is not the guy who was running as the progressive New Day candidate in the primary. Andy Kim was the guy who was running as the let's keep the ship afloat establishment Democrat in the primary. There were 2 or 3 more progressive candidates than Andy Kim in the primary. The most famous in New Jersey that comes to mind is longtime candidate and activist Larry Hamm. I love Larry Hamm. I helped Larry Hamm in 2020 when he was running for Senate. I think Larry Hamm would be great in the Senate, but I mean, Larry Hamm and the other progressive candidates in the Democratic primary all kneecapped themselves out of the gate by saying they endorsed Andy Kim if he won the primary. And you know what good does it do to endorse your opponent in the general in the primary? It's not going to help you in any way. You're not going to win voters because of that.
Well, and I think to me, I don't think the point, and maybe controversial take, and we can discuss it, but I don't think the point of a political campaign is to win. I don't think, and I don't want to be sectarian on this show, but I will say, I don't think, I really respect Larry Ham. I like Larry Ham. I think good candidates should not run in the Democratic Party. Not a matter of whether or not they could win, but because I don't think we should be building faith in the Democratic Party. I think the most clear example we've seen in recent years is Rashida Tlaib.
Yes.
For every criticism I can make of the strategy of working in the Democratic Party, I like Rashida when I hear about her.
So everything.
Sorry. No, and I think her her speaking on Palestine very combatively showed this is a party that will never, as an institution, never support the person who is actually fighting for what's right. And not only will it, as an institution, not support them, it will use its resources as an institution to shut them down the second that it steps out of it.
I could be wrong about this. I may be over-assuming based on what I know about her local career in Detroit. And Dearborn. It's not really Detroit, it's the suburbs. But it's Detroit when you consider it's part of the big Detroit metroplex run by the auto industry. But Dearborn, I mean, you look at her local political action in Dearborn, and what you see is that most of her campaigns in Dearborn were not to actually change policy, but to disrupt the ability of conservatives in local government to make policy, to make them look bad, to arouse public opposition, and to essentially get people thinking in revolutionary ways about the local political establishment. What I like about her career in Congress is that she has been able to more effectively provide institutional opposition to Democratic leadership than other Democrats in Congress, and has been more consistent about doing it. However, if you look at what she's actually been able to accomplish in Congress, then okay, her role is mostly negative in showing how little we can actually accomplish with just one or two progressives. But her negative role is much more valuable than the negative role of AOC or someone else who just continues to accommodate power for free.
Well, I think this is true. I agree with all of that. And I think you can honestly, I'll just say, while we're talking about it, the people like Larry Ham in New Jersey, in any state, I'm sure everyone has their version of a Rashida who is saying all the things that you would actually want someone in this.
I want to cut you off one moment because I want to say this. Whatever else you want to say about Rashida, running as a Democrat, working in the Democratic Party, whether she's a collaborator or institutional opposition, etc., Larry Ham endorsed his primary opponent in the general election before it was over. Rashida Tlaib has never done that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to draw that distinction when we're talking. That is fair.
And she didn't endorse, I believe, Biden.
She didn't go as far as to endorse Jill Stein, but she refused to endorse either Harris or Trump.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think that is fair. But the reason I draw the comparison between the two of them is I think, as you were discussing, I do think they more see their campaign not as a question of winning and changing the system, but on raising ideas, on building a platform for the things that matter, which I value. Where I have a critique of that strategy of working in the Democratic Party is that I know many people in Michigan who are great leftists, combative, hate the Democrats, but have one foot in the party. And part of that is because they have a person like Rashida who, and I don't think she's rubbing her hands together. I don't think, people in New Jersey, are who are like her are rubbing their hands together, being like, ha ha ha, we're going to keep everyone in the Democrats. I don't think that's what they're doing, but I think the impact is still that many people who might break with the Democratic Party and really commit to building something else, something independent, don't do it specifically because they see these genuinely combative leaders in the community, and they see it as, well, this makes it worthwhile to put my time into the Democrats.
I've sat in meetings with left activists who talk about this and talk about why they support progressive Democrats and why they try to choose the least offensive moderate Democrat when there's not a conservative to support. Basically, what it comes down to is their argument is a dirty break between Democrats and the Progressive Party is not going to be possible until the Democrats defeat the Republicans, are completely responsible for government, and continue to fail to deliver. Which sounds good, except, we've been getting that for how many years now? I mean, if the argument is the Democrats need to have complete power and continue to fail to deliver, well, we get that for a little while every few years.
Well, I also think a lot of people have I would love to support such an independent, whether it's a party or organization or national movement, whatever you would call it, something fully independent of the capitalists and the Democrats' base. People say, I would love to commit this, but it doesn't exist now. It's not going to just magically exist one day. It is on all of us to build it. And by saying, I'll support it once it's here, it never comes.
Exactly. That means if you aren't willing to support people trying to build it or build it yourself, what does it matter if you're willing to support it?
Guys, as an outsider here who I can't stand, I'm never going to be involved with the Green Party. I'm never going to be involved with party politics and electoral politics. What's your goal? How long are we supposed to? It's like the white moderate. I'm no offense, guys. I'm going to say something here that's probably going to offend. It reminds me of the white moderates with Dr. King. We've got to build this thing that works within the system to change the fundamental material conditions of the people who are dying right now. We're in an urgency. This isn't like DEFCON 12, whatever you want to call it. We don't have time to work within the system. If we continue to try to operate and build some third-party independent movement that's going to work within this system, we're doomed. We're going to fail. You're going to see the collapse of this country and everything that we're trying to save. There's no way that the Green Party, some independent party, is going to build itself within this system with the oppositional forces that are there and come out on top ever. That's not.
I do also just want to clarify, I'm not affiliated with the Green Party. I discuss with folks in it, but I am not. And
to me, it's all a waste. To me, that's just a giant waste of time.
I'll be totally honest. I tend to support Green Party candidates as the alternative to Democrats and Republicans if you care about voting. And that if you care about voting and you really believe that you want to make change through voting, then ultimately the only way you're ever going to make change by voting is, even if you never actually leave the Democratic Party, the only way you're ever going to be able to convince the Democrats that they have to make changes is to be willing to vote for someone like the Green Party instead of the Democrats. And that's the part that Lawrence O'Donnell tried to explain to people back in the 90s and the 2000s before he got completely suborned by corporate money himself. Now, I'm not saying that's all you do.
But that honestly still puts the framework.
So let me put it simply.
But you're still saying that, right? It's voting.
Every revolutionary movement has two wings. It has a political wing, which makes arguments in the media and in elections and in whatever the normal political forums of the society are. And it has a militant wing, the purpose of which is to build and exert power in order to intimidate and influence the ruling class.
But still, if your foundation is the Constitution of the United States and the democracy
that's the
built.
point of the militant wing. The point of
Right,
the
no,
militant wing is that you're
But again, that's still, you're saying that if we don't vote for somebody other than Democrats, if we like, voting is this ultimate power that we have, and it's just not.
Voting is what power we do have. We can argue about,
which is why you have to organize outside of this. You've got to organize outside of this electoral system, is my point.
Yes, I agree.
You're never going to affect real change from that position. That's that's what I'm saying.
Well, that's why
I refute that. I just think that's a giant waste of time.
It's not. There's one reason it's not a waste of time, and that's because you have to. I mean, I'm going to be I'm going to give a really specific historical example here. There has to be someone in Northern Ireland running for office on the argument that whether you support bombing school buses or not, the IRA has a point. And even if they never actually take their seat in Parliament, which, by the way, they still don't, Sinn Féin in Ireland, even after the Good Friday Agreement, still refuses to take their seats in the British Parliament. They only participate in the local Irish government. Now, that said, they still run, despite not participating in Parliament, they still run for the UK Parliament every general election based on the principle that someone has to explain why we don't accept British rule during the election. It's like Sam said, the point's not to win. The point is to explain all the political action that's going on between elections.
I'm not refuting any of that. I'm talking about what can people who are watching this realistically do, and it's not organizing with those people. Allow that to happen. People have to do that for sure. But what can people do effectively? It's organize outside of that to force the people in power, give them no other option than to do the foundational reforms that we're demanding. That's where you're going to see the most effective change. You're not going to, the system is set up to absorb everybody.
So let me put it
talking
this
about
way.
Rashida Tlaib, it's the same situation. AOC, these people, you can try your hardest from within that system, but whenever it's set up the way it is, the real movements come from outside agitation. You're talking about the militancy, and that's exactly the point. You need those other people, but the real change isn't going to come once they get elected.
Yeah,
that's not what you've even said that. So my point is,
what
can
I'm
the
going to tell a
average
parable
person do?
here. I'm going to tell a parable here to say something that I can't say out loud, but I want to make this point in a parable. And I'm going to pretend to be Jesus for a moment because I got the beard. So there's this famous story of the Good Samaritan, and I'm going to rephrase it slightly. Three men, a man was traveling from Jerusalem to, I'm sorry, I'll put it backwards. A man was traveling from Galilee to Jerusalem to make his pilgrimage to the temple for the year. And on his way to Jerusalem, he was beaten up by robbers and left by the side of the road. And a doctor came by and gave him a prescription and a trip to the hospital. And when he got to the hospital, a healthcare executive denied him coverage, and he ended up in debt. But while he was in the hospital, an Italian working class dude came by and was talking to him a bit. And after some conversation, he went and shot the healthcare executive. Now, which of these three men was the best neighbor to the man who was injured on his way to Jerusalem? Now, that said, we have to then be able to organize around neighborly actions in a way that encourages more neighborly actions and builds fear in the government of people who are good neighbors to one another. Now, the reason I talk about a political wing and a militant wing is even though ultimately there's always something about world conditions that pulls these groups off the rails, Groups that are able to make progress to some degree in the face of imperialism and capitalism generally have both a political and a militant wing, whether we're talking about the IRA, the ANC, Palestinian groups, historically socialist groups in America. All of this had both inside and outside organizing, with the purpose of the inside organizing being explaining the rationale of the outsiders, which is the purpose is to build sympathy for revolutionary movements by engaging in general political activity. Now that's Leninism. Now we can say we don't have time and we have to work fast.
I do say that. I do say
and
that.
all that is true. But at the same time, if no one is willing to get started, what can we do?
My point is this, Chris, and I want to be honest. Good people are going to do that work. They think it's not enough right now. Mm-hmm. We are at the moment in history. This is our moment, truly our moment. If we fail right now, the next century is going to be vastly different than what it could be. And I'm saying that everybody out there that's really nervous, really scared, don't waste your energy with these long-term solutions. Now is the time for that neighborly action you're talking about. Now is the time where we're going to fall. It's not happening.
And I mean, you're making a good point. The fact is, we're a quarter of the way into the 21st century, and we're still fighting over what the 21st century should look like.
I hadn't even really considered that we're 25% of the way through the century. So thank you for that, Chris.
2025. This is 2025. And we're still fighting over what the 21st century is going to look like. We still haven't answered any of the questions that have been hanging out there since the 90s. We are still fighting the 90s in 2025. The only difference is that Rush Limbaugh is now Donald Trump and actually is president.
Right. And that's my point. Right now, we're in a situation. You've got immigration crises, right? You've got trans people on the chopping block across the United States and now federally. It's just reminiscent of that civil rights. And honestly, I'm not criticizing you. It's just the lack of urgency here. It really is reminiscent of that. Just wait. It's going to come at the right time. And I just don't think we have time for that anymore. People have got to be way more urgent and way more focused on what actions they're taking and where we go from here.
I would like to push back a little bit in regards to now there's a whole other discussion, which honestly, I don't have it in me to get into, but I do want to keep exchanging with you guys about what we need to be doing. Where I want to push back is I do think a lot of times there's a lot of pessimism. There's a lot of, and true, stuff is bad, shit is bad. I think we've actually seen, and I was an infant, I was a toddler in the 90s, but I think what's different about the 90s and the early 2000s, I actually think we see a lot of struggle everywhere. I think Black Lives Matter, largest social movement in US history. You have everyone I know is all they're talking about is defending immigrants. And this includes people who have been consistent throughout even the Biden years, but people who looked away and are now realizing that was a mistake and we have to do something. I'm seeing it everywhere. We've seen really dynamic changes in the labor movement. The Palestine struggle that's swept around the world in all the centers of imperialism. I think, to me, again, what we do with this energy, it'll depend on the ebbs and flows in struggle in the political landscape, and it is important we keep having debates over how to organize it, this and that. But I do want to say, and I don't know if if you were saying this or not, but I do think there's a tendency for people to say, "Oh, there's only so much we can do because shit is bad and we're not even united yet." But I do think there's a way in which even people on the left who understand the need to struggle can sometimes underestimate actually how much we have to work with in the way that we've seen very, very powerful developments and struggle develop in the past year.
One thing
real quick, I want to make it clear. I am advocating for an action, which is this national movement. I've been thinking about this for a while, and something that I really want to get pushed towards the people that have more influence than me, right? This idea of a national movement. Democrats are failing to lead in this moment, right? We've got so many people, like you're saying, there's energy out there for something. They know something is wrong. Education and a real push, like I said, and I mean this, for reconstitution, fundamentally changing the flawed foundation of this country, a people's movement across the United States, demanding that we get a brand new, revised, modern constitution to actually fix the problems. That's what I think we need in this moment.
There is an account on Twitter, or at least there used to be, General Strike Revolution, that's whole purpose was advocating for exactly that. I haven't seen I've had them on. I've had the founder of who runs the account on my show a couple of times in anonymity. I haven't seen them.
I think I might have spoken to that guy before myself. Now that I forgot about him, but yeah, I think now's the time though. Now we've got the energy
but I mean,
it, right?
That account seems to have. I don't know whether it's because they're being suppressed or, which that's happening. We're all being suppressed on Twitter. I've noticed. I see Sam stuff because I'm in a group DM with Sam. I don't see Sam stuff in my general feed, even though we've been following each other for a long time. I mean,
likewise, you do not show up in my feed.
Exactly. So we only see each other's stuff if one of us puts stuff in the group DM we're both in. Now, I do see stuff from people in my feed that I interact with, and that's great. I love that. I don't have the complaint some people do where all they see is liberal stuff and fascist stuff. But that said, unless I'm actually interacting with someone, I don't see their stuff. And unless someone is actually interacting with me or in a group DM with me, they don't see my stuff. I used to get, a minimum of 10 to 15 likes on a tweet. And now I feel like I'm going viral when I break 10. And, this is the world that we're living in. I'm reaching the point where I'm actually starting some of the time to get more traction on posts on Blue Sky than Twitter. And I may start to be more active there than on Twitter if that keeps happening.
Which is fascinating to me because as far as I can tell, the left has not made it onto Blue Sky yet.
There are leftists on Blue Sky. For left-leaning accounts that used to be on Twitter that people would be interested in rediscovering, Cheryl Weichelt has been on Blue Sky for a long time. She had a great account on Twitter for years and was one of the first people to leave when Elon Musk took over. She's a public defender and an eviction lawyer and does free stuff for people who are organizing protests on, how not to get arrested if that's what they're going for, or how to get arrested if that's what they are going for, and how to defend, what to do when arrested and how to defend themselves and such. But there are leftward swing, who was very, very active in the Bernie community on Twitter for years, is active on Blue Sky now. Great conspiracy journalist and former Snopes editor-in-chief, Brooke, her last name is escaping, Brooke Binkowski. She is on Blue Sky. She's great, even if she's a little bit pro-Ukraine for me. She's still great on the international Nazi conspiracy. She just doesn't quite tie it all together quite right. She's a little too much buying into the Russia bad, but still a good account to follow in general, especially on domestic right-wing stuff. There are a lot, but there are lots of other good accounts to follow. But the trouble is that Blue Sky, number one, doesn't have an algorithm, so you have to seek out the people you want to engage with, and they have to seek you out. So you have to put some work in to get established. And it can feel like your work to return ratio isn't as well rewarded as quickly as on Twitter, but I think it's worth it for people to get established there. The way social media is changing, we're not going to be able to just stay in one place. We have to be on Twitter, on Blue Sky, on Substack, on YouTube, on a few different places.
You have to also actively search out and keep a community around you, because I don't even post publicly anymore. It's pointless. I used to get 1,000 likes on a podcast, As the World Burns, if anybody remembers it. And now I post something that I think is genius and I'll get 2 likes. It's not happening anymore. It's not the real engagement that it used to be. There's no, what did they use the public square? There's none of that going on anymore. What do you
algorithm?
If it wasn't for, you go.
You go first, Sam.
I was just going to say, if it wasn't for this group chat we're in and 1 or 2 others, I don't think I would be getting any engagement, let alone views on Twitter, at least.
Yeah, no, I know the feeling, and I'm thinking about setting up a group chat on Blue Sky and expanding my group chat on Twitter to try to create more activity. It's just I've got to the point where I'm not as brave about adding people as I used to be.
I'll tell you, the only reason I even formed a group chat was because it was the very first community I found was with Chris and a few other people, because I was trying to get my story about what was happening with the West Virginia Democrats out. Nobody would engage with me. So I just made a massive group chat with everybody that I could. And so many people left, and who was left became one of my core communities of people that have guided me and helped me grow in my activism. And it's been, one of the greatest things that ever happened was taking that chance by adding everybody into that group chat. So they leave. So what? Adam, that's what I say.
No, I mean, just recently I finally, worked up the nerve to start trying to promote my Substack. And if anyone wants to follow it, maybe I can share the link. But it really was actually very interesting. On a whim, I just DM'd various, I mainly only DM'd people who follow me already on Twitter. And some of the ones who respond, it really was, I was not expecting them to respond. It was like, oh, well, might as well. And not only the support, but I mean, real solidarity, I think was really interesting. Similarly, I've been in large group chats and people leave, and then the people who stay are people who, I consider very important political relationships, and in certain cases, even personal friendships. So
I used to be able to.
The internet.
I was running my whole show off 2 or 3 group chats at what I would call the height of my clout in 2021. It was great. Now, what's happened is social media has changed since then. The algorithms have changed since then in order to drive content that benefits the platform in some way. There is cutthroat competition, for instance, between Twitter and Substack. Though Substack is saying nice things about Elon Musk and Donald Trump's politics, on a business level, Substack and Twitter are, in a horrible competition. And Twitter is deliberately suppressing your Substack links because they don't want to drive traffic away from Twitter to Substack, which is sort of silly because the whole point of Twitter was to tie different parts of the internet together. And now it's become just one more way to split people up. And that's what we're seeing. I mean, the Blue Sky plan, if anybody has listened to them and watched them, the Blue Sky plan is to create something that looks very much like Substack with the purpose of controlling the payments from the consumer to the creator and getting a cut of all of them. what we're seeing is, Substack trying to overtake Patreon while Twitter tries to become Substack and therefore starts competing with Patreon. Now, what I will say is I appreciate Patreon. It is still the easiest place to link all of my stuff from other sources together. But the place that used to be where you would share your stuff from all those different sources, Twitter, is now one of several places you have to put your stuff out in order to try to get people to come see it on YouTube or Substack or Patreon or wherever. And that your biggest driver on each platform is going to be your following on that platform and not your ability to promote yourself on other platforms. Which is frustrating and difficult, but that's what it is.
Well, and just to be clear, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this, but I am working the work. I'm able to do the work that I do because Marianne Clater and I, two-person team in 2016, made history by becoming the first. She became the first African American to win a statewide contested race in West Virginia with no money. We just did it with our intuition and our grit. And Facebook played a massive part in that because the targeting for advertisements wasn't restricted politically yet. We were able to take, at one point, we spent $1,000 on one ad, and we reached over 400,000 people in West Virginia, specifically in West Virginia. That is insane turnover on an advertisement politically. We had people that would come up to us and say, "Hey, I saw your videos on Facebook." We were like the only, that's how we won, was the ability to reach regular people in the state organically and through simple targeting. That's gone. You spend $1,000 now, you might reach 5,000 people, or a little bit more. But it is ridiculously gutted, and you don't have the option.
There was a campaign in a red district in Texas in 2020. The Democrat who was running was Donna Imam. She was possibly the single best progressive running in the Democratic Party in 2020, and I include Bernie Sanders in that. She won her nomination. She won her nomination despite running against someone who had been the nominee the previous year and had quote unquote locked in endorsements from a bunch of the progressive establishment and was counting on being the Elizabeth Warren candidate and assuming that they were going to be the automatic Bernie Sanders supporter pick too, and really went off the rails when it became clear that Donna's candidate was a serious one, that they were reaching people in the district both by door-to-door campaigning in Republican Bell County, meeting with almost all the voters they intended to meet with, and targeted social media advertising with the groups in the district. They won the primary. Donna won the primary despite being somebody nobody knew of, a local tech person running solely based on the strength of good ideas and a strong campaign program. And then COVID happened. And when COVID happened, she lost in the general because, they couldn't do that ground game anymore. And while they were able to do a lot with social media isn't going to get you one congressional district in the general the same way it can in the primary, and their ground game was gone. But then in 2022, Donna couldn't even effectively fight for the nomination in her new district because the algorithms had changed so much that she could no longer target the right people and line up the right support.
Yeah, it's completely it's not meant for small time candidates or grassroots movements. It's not made for that anymore.
No,
I honestly believe that it was
designed to hurt
it was done on purpose.
grassroots.
Right, because they blamed so much of the Russian disinformation and all of that from 2016. They blamed that on social media companies, and rather than, I don't know, it's like they internalize, they use that as an excuse more so than reacting to it. I believe it was, this is why we must now stop small time money from being able to influence politics. Now it's almost explicitly stated that you have to be a serious candidate to even advertise anything political. If I make a political podcast, I have to jump through hoops in order to be able to advertise it through these platforms now, because it's of social importance. There's a real gatekeeping aspect of why they've changed the algorithms, and it's Arab Spring. It's the rise of Bernie Sanders. It's the
anti-democracy.
It's exactly right. We have the ability to connect and share ideas, and it grew these movements that threatened real power. And they've got to stop that. And it's not like a big conspiracy theory. This is just how power operates. And sometimes you have to say they do things because that's what power.
There was a period during the 60s and 70s where television news coverage led to real social upheaval. And television news coverage changed. There was a period in the 60s and 70s where responsive politicians turned social upheaval into social reform. So politics changed. There was a time in the 80s and 90s where some movements seemed like they were going to be revived by talk radio and new media. And you see a huge right-wing corporate investment in talk radio that drives talk radio to the right. Let's remember that the phenomenon of talk radio and talk shows was started by a liberal named Phil Donahue, who just wanted people to understand each other more. And from that, we got Rush Limbaugh. Imagine the sort of weird tangent from Phil Donahue to Rush Limbaugh. And it's only possible because of corporate investment in response to what people were able to do with the media. And now we've gotten off our topic, so I'm going to try to get us back to duopoly and how this all ties back in. People like Bob Menendez were part of the Beltway consensus that forged the compromises that empowered corporations to change things in this way. And it's not a coincidence that before he became politically untouchable, Bob Menendez was one of the senators that people liked to talk to about policy on the news, because he was somebody their corporate sponsors were all comfortable with. And if you really look at the people who make it on the news, the people who are consistently on the news are people corporate sponsors are comfortable with. What do you guys think about that?
I think I see Mikey Sherrill on the news a lot. Yeah, and I assume we're going to be seeing Andy Kim on the news a lot, and we hear Cory Booker on the news a lot.
Mikey Sherrill is ironically part of the quote unquote anti-squad of moderates with Elise Slotkin and Abigail Spanberger, who were supposed to, be the real new face of the Democratic Party. Abigail Spanberger, of course, only lasted one term.
Well, Mikey Sherrill is certainly, I don't know if she'll be our governor, but she will certainly be the Democrats' pick for governor by far. And I mean, and she's crafty too. I think she, she's backed by a machine. So there's a certain level of, she doesn't have to be savvy in politics when you're backed by a machine. But I do think, I obviously hate her because I'm on the left and I can see the nonsense with her, but I do think she's very good at striking a perfect balance between the sort of centrist or just barely center-left liberals who make up the NGO spaces that are important to New Jersey politics, and not offending them, while also
making
not offending the center-right and more right-wing small business owners who are very important to New Jersey.
But making just enough progressive noises to make the right kind of more progressive-ish sort of social democrat voter in New Jersey, who probably is themselves PMC or small business, but tries to think of themselves as being in solidarity with working people on some level. Just progressive enough to fool some of them.
Now, I'm very skeptical that that is enough to win in New Jersey anymore. And, you know, there's a lot of speculation, especially after this election, that we're about to be a swing state and that a quite right-wing candidate could be the governor. But I do think she is very good at that formula that has been the formula for as long as I've paid attention to New Jersey politics.
I mean, if New Jersey becomes a swing state, the New Jersey Democrats are the only ones to blame, much like the New York Democrats if New York becomes a swing state.
You know, and that's the key, Chris. I'm sick of people defending the inaction and the lack of leadership from the Democrats. Listen, here's the real issue. Why all of this we have allowed for too long the donor class to control politics. It's the way it was set up originally. Of course, capital property determined who had a say, right? And now it's the same thing happening within the Democrats, within the Republicans. You've got so many people desperate for something real that they look at Democrats and say, that's the best option I have. And so they do that defense thing where they defend every action that they take when these people should be out there. And I'm talking about the Democrats, not the people like us. I'm talking about those people that are Democrats watching this happen, who see the problems but refuse to do anything within their own party. They are the reason that we've seen such a meteoric rise from Trump again in 2024. They got into office in 2020. They allowed procedural rules to keep them from enacting minimum wage hikes, right? That's the same thing that you see within all of these Democratic parties that I'm talking about, where the takeovers are happening.
And if I can interject here,
procedural rules. You know, it's a pattern. It's the inaction that breeds.
And Republicans never allow procedural rules to stop them from doing something they really care about doing. They will allow procedural rules to stop them from doing things that they're not necessarily serious about doing. You see how Mitch McConnell, while never actually voting to protect it himself, kept allowing people to do little procedural things that ultimately saved Obamacare during Trump's first term. But at the same time, he never did anything to protect Obamacare himself. So you have this Republican inaction where we will allow members of the party to save these Democratic programs so they exist for us to attack. We will weaken them, but we will not destroy them, because if the program is actually destroyed, then we start to run out of our arguments. Now, unfortunately, the Republicans were running out of freedom to promise without delivering, and that was why Trump won the nomination in 2020. They wanted somebody to keep some of those promises. And whether you like it or not, Trump's political success is being seen to keep a set of promises to the aggrieved white people who drove him into power.
I mean, I will also say, I think on this, the fundamental issue with the Democrats is that they are the party of maintaining illusion in the institutions of the state that everyone is sick of and seeing as not representing them. And I would say doesn't actually exist to represent the vast majority of people in this country working class.
The Democrats are invested in selling faith in the fiction of American democracy so that no one fights for an actually democratic society. I totally agree with that.
And so they will always side with, or I wouldn't say, they will never call the institutions into question. I think we should be calling these institutions into question with a radical left, and I would say revolutionary socialist program. And the problem is that the right is very, very well funded, well organized. I think more divided than some people assume, but certainly has a cohesive far-right program which is willing to call these institutions into question for the intention of reworking them to serve capital.
And the far right has institutional support from the big tech platform, the big tech cartel that owns the platforms that allows people to get messages out there.
Yes. Yeah. And the Democrats can't ever, because of the class composition of their base and how they function as an institution, they can't call these institutions into question with a radical left politics. They can't just do what the right is doing. So they are constantly in a position of being just right-wing enough that they think they can bring people over while never moving left enough that they would actually cause people to start more deeply questioning institutions.
The weakness of institutionalism is that defending institutions at all cost actually empowers your political enemies to use those institutions against you when they assume power. Most obviously the police state. Joe Biden spent 4 years building up the police state that Donald Trump is now going to use against Americans.
And I would say more than 4 years. He was Crime Bill Joe.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm just talking about as president. But absolutely, as senator, I mean, you go all the way back to 1972, where Joe Biden is one of the first of the pro-police state Democrats to run against an anti-police state Republican. Joe Biden ran against Cale Boggs in Delaware years before the Paul Tsongas ran against Edward Brooke in Massachusetts, or Daniel Patrick Moynihan ran for what used to be Jacob Javits' seat in New York. And it's worth noting that these great Republican liberals who were in many ways to the left of many Democrats of their time, like Cale Boggs and Edward Brooke and Jacob Javits, were not defeated by right-wing Republicans, but by right-wing Democrats. Edward Brooke was not defeated by some primary challenge from his right. And I think that in the end is why Seth's experience in West Virginia was what it was, because the Democratic Party is always going to be responding to money from the swamp in the same way that the Republican Party does.
Well, and let me add this in as well, because it really is, there is an effort, and this is kind of off topic, but to politicize marginalized identities to the point where you see this in whenever somebody who is a part of a marginalized community bucks back against any Democratic, tries to stand up to the Democrats, they get questioned. What did Joe Biden say? You're not even black at that one point. They want to own these identities. So what they did in West Virginia was start this affirmative action committee to say Joe Manchin is a racist. And they set up this, it was done by Selena Vickers and Harold Ickes. Like I said, they were in cahoots. I'm willing to say that publicly. I believe that. And if they want to sue me, they can. They were in cahoots, worked together corruptly to implement this affirmative action committee to find an end within the executive committee. When minorities joined up and we started voicing our own opinions and trying to, operate within the system that they've set up and said that they wanted, we were crushed, silenced. Every single racial minority on that affirmative action committee has voiced this opinion. Basically, I've got it all on record. And again, nobody cares. But the point is that they use these identities to boost the white reformers that are out there now that aren't really reformers at all. They're just the DNC backed people to replace these machines that are in these states. And that's what I think we're seeing.
West Virginia Democratic House leader Mike Pushkin, who was part of the Manchin machine and then became a leader against it.
Exactly. And with, again, all of this ties back into the DNC, but it's the strategy, right? It's the strategy overarching that we need to be aware of.
And look what happens. Look what happens if someone successfully challenges a state party. Nevada, there was a very active left caucus in the Nevada Democratic Party that successfully took over the whole state party apparatus in Nevada. And what did the liberals do? They stole all the money and set up their own offices. And Nevada's that whole takeover has essentially disappeared. Those activists who went to all that work have disappeared from social media. The progressive energy in Nevada that successfully took over that state party has been crushed. We're seeing arguments in Nevada between really, really conservative pro-Israel Democrats and equally conservative pro-Israel Republicans over whether or not they should deport the family members of workers in the culinary union that elected all the Democrats in Nevada. And this is despite their complete political defeat within the so-called democratic machinery of the party. They stole the party money and ignored the democratic machinery, and in the end they won, and the people who were trying to take over the Nevada Democratic Party lost despite winning.
Well, and I guarantee you that boils down to enforcement. So I was looking into filing a lawsuit at the end of June. From the lawyers I spoke to, the way that these parties are set up, there's not a lot in terms of protections. They're able to self-govern, and it would be an uphill battle. And we risked codifying basically their right to discriminate by pursuing this at that moment. So it's just something that I dropped. But
why was there not a court victory for those progressive Nevada Democrats? Why was there not a court victory for the progressive socialist candidate in Baltimore who won the nomination but was then defeated in a general election by the combined votes of Republicans and centrist Democrats and the massive corporate money put behind the independent incumbent mayor by the Democratic Party whose nomination she had won?
Right. That's my point. Whenever power backs you, those rules that apply to everybody else, they don't work. They don't work for
nobody. Nobody enforces those rules. And when California Democrats sued because their delegates voted for Hillary Clinton at the convention, the Democratic Party's defense was, we're a private corporation. We don't have to do what our voters say in primaries. And
in my understanding, it goes beyond just being a private. There are rules, right, that are written. There are laws written that prop up
legally
those parties.
speaking,
and so there's barriers there. There's legitimate immunity within the party that goes beyond what a normal private corporation even has.
Well, because all their rules, all their private club rules basically break down to, well, you're only actually a Democrat if you're a dues-paying member of a Democratic Party club.
Well, and even still, if you're a dues-paying member, they still have the discretion to enact the rules however they want. So if they discriminate, there's still no
their court case. By the argument of their court case, if a majority of dues-paying members of a Democratic Party club voted a certain way and were suing in the same situation, they might or might not have a case based on the existing legal precedent. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not as much interested in making law in the courts as liberals were in the 1970s and 1980s. But that said, if you're interested in building attention for court cases, then that's one of the strategies. But
well, I mean, just to be clear, I'm saying that this is from experience, speaking to lawyers about suing in federal court, the DNC and the WVDP.
They shut you down
so
fast.
many, and every single one of them said, "Don't."
How many of those lawyers? I mean, here's the question: how many of those lawyers are dues-paying members of the Democratic Party club who might have a conflict of interest if they took a case against the DNC?
Now that's also a possibility, but I mean, I didn't want to spend that much money myself to go through with it, but I was willing to. I had discussed it with people, and every single one of them said the law is not on your side because of the way that these are. They don't have any obligation to follow their own rules, basically,
exactly,
or any obligation to not discriminate based upon, like basically what I experienced. You know, I took I don't know. Again, you're right. Maybe some of these lawyers misguided me due to their own biases. I don't know. But ultimately, every single one of them said the same thing. Don't waste your time. It's not going to go the way that you want it to. So
one of the biggest problems in our society, which Democrats use frequently against third-party candidates as if it's some sort of proof of conspiracy, is that if you want to sue the Democrats, you need to have a Republican lawyer. And if you want to sue the Republicans, you need to have a Democrat lawyer. And that otherwise you're not going to get anywhere because all the lawyers who aren't Democrats don't want to piss off the Republicans. And all the lawyers who aren't Republicans don't want to piss off the Democrats.
Yeah, I don't know that I looked at any Republican lawyers myself. I went to, but the thing also is there were lawyers that said they would help me, but they also advised me against it. It's just the legal precedents that they would be looking at, that they've looked at, said I didn't have anything to stand on. They were able to do everything they did was legal within the framework.
If you want a lawyer who's going to sue the Democratic Party with an intention of winning and being ready to go to court as quickly as possible, it almost has to be a Republican. They're the only election lawyers ready to go to war with the Democrats at the drop of a hat. This is why Democrats were able to make the big attack against against Jill Stein that Jay Sekulow was representing her in court. Because, like it or not, if you're going to court with the Democrats, the only institution set up to fight Democratic ballot challenges quickly is the Republican legal system that exists to defend Republican candidates from Democratic challenges.
Which also, let me point out, this just proves that the legal system is built it's not equitable either, right? All of the systems that we work within, that we're supposed to be, I don't know, reforming, they're set up to crush this opposition. And that's what makes this so incredibly difficult. You can have every fact on your side, and you still have no recourse.
One of the most aggressive, and it's sad that this was one of the most aggressive things anyone tried to do about COVID, especially in retrospect. One of the most aggressive pieces of COVID legislation was Joe Kennedy III's everyone should have a right to a lawyer for a class action suit against their insurance company because of COVID. Now, Joseph Kennedy III is a lawyer, and the people who are going to be who would have been most benefited by laws like that would have been Democratic Party lawyers who handle class action suits. So this statement by Joe Kennedy III was an argument made for a policy that would benefit a professional association that primarily supports Democrats, the trial lawyers. Now, that said, despite all the criticism that it got, no one was really proposing anything better, with a couple of exceptions. And Joe Kennedy's suggestion was getting some degree of institutional support until the Democrats decided to stop caring about COVID. And so it's worth understanding why we get what looks like the reform that we get sometimes. The same trial lawyers who were pushing for support of Joe Kennedy's let's pay for everybody to have a lawyer to sue their insurance company program, we're also against former prosecutor Kamala Harris for being too progressive and preferred Val Demings for vice president. Now, and I think about that as scary. They thought Kamala Harris was too progressive and preferred someone else.
Again, it speaks to where we are politically in this country is dangerous, right? I mean, we've got, it's just, what are regular people?
I'm going to say something that's going to blow your mind. Where we are politically in this country has always been dangerous. We have had more political violence in America than in almost any other equivalent liberal democracy.
And how much violence we're responsible for across the globe, especially in the global South. Come on.
And yet we like to say, we don't have political violence in America. But I mean, every time the cops beat up peaceful protesters and we have a history of police riots. America has had police riots out the ears more than almost any other country. And we still have police riots in an era where almost every country but France has stopped. It's just crazy. Now, we're getting to the point where we're getting within our last 15 minutes or so. So does anybody have any final thoughts or anything to promote? Sam?
Good question. Well, I did mention I have a Substack, and I actually don't usually talk about New Jersey or national politics. I talk about New Jersey sometimes. I write a lot about international politics, U.S. foreign policy, a lot of immigration lately, so I'll plug that. I don't know what it's called off the top of my head. It's new.
At the moment, let me take a look at that, because I was looking at that just the other day. I think it's just Sam Carliner Writes right now.
That is correct. That is what it is called. Very uncreative, but gets the point across. And there's not a lot of other Sam Carliners. So,
I mean, there's probably fewer Sam Carliners than Chris Richards. I would agree.
Yeah. And then my handle on all social media, if anyone wants to follow me, is Sam in the Can. I am on Twitter. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on other places, but Twitter and Blue Sky are the ones I actually use for politics.
Yeah, I'm also Eclectic Radical everywhere. Twitter, Blue Sky, YouTube, Substack. I'm Eclectic Radical everywhere. It's easy to find me. Eclectic Radical on Patreon if you want to support the show. Eclectic Radical on PayPal and the Cash App if you want to support the show but don't feel like you can commit every month. Seth, I know you had a few things going on. The last time we were on, you talked about a podcast about a cloning scandal there in West Virginia. Yeah, I heard you say that you're sort of running into some roadblocks on that and you may be looking into other things. What have you got?
Well, it's not necessarily roadblocks. I have had I was waiting on my FOIA request from the FDA. It finally came through. I've got 10 pages of documents. And it's so interesting. We've got the state auditor of West Virginia right now is Mark Hunt. And he is the one who orchestrated with this cult, this attempt to clone humans in Nitro, West Virginia. And the documents lay out basically that they wanted to investigate further to see if there was any fraud or what. And I honestly believe that September 11th got Mark Hunt off the chopping block, so to speak. I think that a lot happened in a short time period after all of this, and it just kind of got swept away because the main takeaway I got from the documents was this place was so dirty, the equipment was so old. I mean, they basically couldn't have been doing any real testing yet, and that's why they got off the hook. But people need to understand, we're talking about from what I've spoken to experts, this is the only full-blown attempt to create a clandestine cloning operation in the United States, at least, definitely, possibly in the world. And we now have the guy responsible is now the state auditor of West Virginia.
I'm willing to believe that movies like The Boys from Brazil have some sort of historical basis to them. I don't think anybody ever succeeded on the level that people succeed in that movie, but I do think I do think that cloning is something that Nazis have been interested in for a long time in the tradition of such movies.
Well, that's honestly one of the things that so my whole idea is to take this 2001 story, recontextualize it in 2025, re-examine it, and center the would-be victims, the crimes that were actually committed and glossed over at the time. A lot of this, one of the things that we talk about with my experts is the pop culture, the Boys from Brazil, X-Files, all of these different sci-fi shows that were really in everybody's mind that took away the nuts and bolts of. Nobody thinks about how do they actually clone? They just think cloning, and it's this movie thing where now you've got this clone. Oops, there it is. But the process is brutal. It is disgusting what they were going to do and who they were going to harm. And so that's what we want to explore. And I kind of hit a creative roadblock because it's just me. I had a couple of people who were wanting to help, but they're not that interested anymore. So I've got to edit, write, produce this whole entire thing. It's just a big project, but it's called the Nitro Files. I do have a website, thenitrofiles.com. It's not ready yet, but hopefully in the next few months, we'll be getting more progress. I'll be able to get more interviews with people that were actually involved with it. And we'll put something together to really highlight this story, because it's so fascinating and so relevant right now, how these things could happen, people get away with it, right? He's now the state auditor.
I think it's extremely relevant that a guy who was at the center of a cloning scandal in 2001 is now running an important state position after winning a statewide election.
That's all about, and the auditor is all about holding people accountable and transparency. Yes. And here's this guy,
someone who's been under investigation himself, is now responsible for holding other people accountable.
And say what you will, this is a guy who started a company claiming that they were going to do work that wasn't medical research, and they were obfuscating the fact that they were going to do real unethical human research in a laboratory that wasn't. It was an old classroom retrofitted with secondhand medical equipment. This is the craziest thing that you could ever imagine, only in West Virginia, and how it has been so ignored. Whenever this guy has been a politician since then, he keeps winning office, he keeps winning elections. Why this isn't more of an ethical consideration for people, I don't understand.
You say only in West Virginia, but that really gives too little credit to the folks in Kansas and Nebraska who realized that they could make meth and fentanyl in trailer parks and cut international drug cartels out of their whole business.
That's fair. They're enterprising over there. But it is. And so I do want to promote that. I do think people should keep an eye out for that. I hope that it turns out to be something really impressive. We have experts. I have Dr. Yanya Lalich from the Lalich Center for Cult Research, Dr. Jonathan Moreno, who was the Obama Ethics Committee, I believe, Bioethics Committee chair. I've got Professor Josephine Johnson from New Zealand has spoken to me. I've got a few other people I'm trying to get on who were actually there. There was a lady who's now in her 80s who was at the press conference where the representative from CloneAid, which is the medical research wing of the cult of the Raelians, did a press conference about all of it. She wrote a song about cloning. It's so interesting if I can get all of these people involved, but it's a long process, and I'm doing it all by myself. So hopefully I have something to present.
I admit that I like this project because, one, it's this sort of ridiculously sensational thing that gets people's attention, but two, it is a true story about the corruption and lack of concern for ethical and human rights questions of someone who is a sitting state officer in West Virginia right now.
Right, he's a very powerful person, and it's very interesting, like I said, and I do want people to engage with it, because I think that there's ethical. You can learn a lot from this story in terms of other offices, other people, and if their ethical violations.
And I think it's safe to say that if a podcast about a cloning scandal in West Virginia, where the central figure is in state office in West Virginia now, never sees the light of day, that someone may have been motivated to kill it.
Hey, listen, guys, I've been poking bears my entire time in my political work. So I hear people telling me all the time, Seth, you always attack Democrats. So here's your opportunity to see what happens whenever I set my targets on a Republican who's well-deserving as well. I'm equal opportunity, guys. I really, truly believe in what I do. And Mark Hunt, the state auditor of West Virginia, is unethical, to say the least. And I hope that when people see the reality of what he did, they second guess re-electing him in 2028. He's got to go. This was the craziest thing that they let slide. They've allowed him to win office multiple times when he has shown zero remorse for what would have been a real atrocity against human rights. These women, they were members of the cult that they were going to experiment on. And if you know anything about cloning, it is a brutal process that it's dehumanizing, it's violent, it's dangerous. And they were going to do it without ever telling anyone they were doing it. So what would they have done when negative outcomes happen? They aren't going to report that. I mean, there's a lot of implications if they had been able to operate or continue on.
What I will say is there is a large genre of both fiction and movies, both Hollywood and made for TV from about the 70s to the 90s, that covers in detail what they will do if any of this gets out. I mean, the Pelican Brief comes to mind, and that doesn't even involve cloning.
Well, and I'll tell you, one of the episodes that I'm working on is actually cloning in popular media, which I believe plays into why Mark Hunt got away with this. So anything that you want to send my way about that, I would be, be helpful.
I definitely recommend, if we're talking about cloning in popular media, I recommend The Island, starring Ewan McGregor and Scarlett Johansson. It's got a great little supporting role by Sean Bean as a mad scientist-y doctor. And it's got an even better supporting role by Damon Hansu, who is essentially playing this movie's version of Mick Jagger's character in the classic Free Jack.
Okay.
To some extent, The Island... To some extent, you can say The Island is a remake of Free Jack in a more contemporary and less obviously silly setting.
Okay.
Which is kind of disappointing because that ties into another show about how there's nothing original in Hollywood anymore. But there's never been anything original in Hollywood, and quite a bit of that has turned out to be good anyway. So maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. But that said, my final thoughts for the show are, if you want to support independent media, then you want to support actual independent media. People on Substack who are not getting paid by a legacy corporation. People on Twitter and YouTube who are posting their stuff directly and not getting attention from big accounts who are paying for blue checks. You want to support the independent media that is run by working class people for working class people so that we can build a working class media culture. Because for all the talk about class war, not culture war, we cannot fight a class war without building a working class culture. We have to decide what that culture is going to look like to be able to stay together and fight against the ruling class. It's that simple. We need lawyers, guns, and money. And the best place to put the money right now is independent media like this show, like projects Sam and Seth are working on, like The Gauntlet by former guest Julia. I hate it when I can't talk. The Gauntlet, this show, Pat and Layla have a good show. There's lots of good independent media out there, and it's really depressing that I can't name 10 shows the way I used to be able to in 2021. A lot of my colleagues have either gone right-wing, gone liberal, or dropped out. I'm still here. I hope to stick around. I hope folks can continue to support us so that we can grow. Right now, we're barely hanging in there. More patrons are always good. More followers on YouTube. Hit subscribe if you like this show. Share it somewhere. We need your help. Thank you, folks. I'm glad you've been able to join our conversation today. I hope you've been able to get something out of it. I have tried to make it informative and productive. We have also gotten sidetracked by some of our own arguments, which I hope will also help people come to productive decisions of their own. And final word, basic, the thing everybody needs to be trying to organize locally if they can is mutual aid. And the second thing that everybody needs to be able to organize locally if they can is a community defense network to protect that mutual aid. And that's where we are. Because mutual aid will be criminalized if poverty becomes more important. Look how the bail fund in Atlanta was criminalized when they decided Stop Cop City was going too far. Until next week, where I hope to be able to put together another show, hang in there. Follow us on Twitter, on Blue Sky, on Substack, and we'll tweet at you. Take care, folks.